Thank you for coming, everyone. This is our annual Tibetan Buddhism event that I look forward to every year, and I want to begin by thanking the Khyentse Foundation for creating a Tibetan Buddhism program here, and this lecture is in honor of all their work. Before we begin, I want we have a small award ceremony we do every year for the Khyentse, also sponsored by the Khyentse Foundation separately, for the Khyentse Foundation Award for Excellence in Buddhist Studies. So we'll do that briefly and then move on to the main event. Professor Shen Weirong, who's here from Beijing. Yeah, so with no further ado, could I ask Alumni to come stand here while I read embarrassing things about you? So this award is given every year to an undergraduate student who has shown excellence in the study of Buddhism. And Ailani Sato Lim is our awardee this year. She's currently a junior. This award often goes to seniors, but in this case, there were exceptional reasons. Ailani's majoring in cognitive science and minoring in Buddhist studies. And in our selection committee's discussions, it quickly became obvious that she would be this year's awardee. And frankly, I don't mean to embarrass you too much, but I don't think I've ever seen a college transcript more loaded with A+, with just a few A's to round it out, but otherwise solid A+. And as Robert Scharf, who's unfortunately not here today, said, she got, quote unquote, an unheard of 99% in his Introduction to Buddhism course. So she's a great student. And Ailani grew up in Pasadena in Southern California and graduated from LaSalle College Prep. And so when I asked her to provide some more personal background, she wrote, quote, "Growing up, I had no direct connection to religion, especially Buddhism, as my Korean side is nominally Christian, and my grandmother in Japan converted to Catholicism at an early age. In fact, I was wary of religion until high school when a teacher introduced me to Catholic mysticism. And when the paperback collection of my dad, who grew up in the remnants of Berkeley's counterculture, led me to the Tao Te Ching, Alan Watts, and D.T. Suzuki." So this was all still while a high school student. So inspired, she enrolled in Professor Scharf's Intro to Buddhism course in her first semester here, an experience which she says subverted my preconceptions of Buddhism and in turn expanded my view of the academic study of religion. Since then, she's taken several additional courses in Buddhist studies classes, most recently with our two postdocs, Sam Grimes and Xiaoming Hao. And she also attended our 2022 conference on Buddhism and physics, which took place in this room, and now hopes to continue her studies of Buddhism alongside cognitive science without falling into, in her words, the pitfalls of essentializing one or the other. So that's very interesting, and as most of us know, there's a lot going on in the conversations between cognitive science and Buddhism. So it'll be great to have her join those conversations. She also asked that I extend her thanks to the Khyentse Foundation and to Berkeley's group in Buddhist Studies for this wonderful award. So thank you for being such a wonderful student. Okay, so this is, I've lost track now, maybe the 16th Khyentse lecture or something like that. And this year we're very happy to welcome Professor Shen Weirong. Professor Shen is a professor of history in the Advanced Institute for Humanities and Social Sciences and the Department of Chinese Language and Literature at Tsinghua University in Beijing. He first did his MA in history at Nanjing University in 1986, and then went on to complete a PhD in language and cultural studies of Central Asia at Bonn University, completing that in 1998. He wrote his dissertation on a key figure in the history of Tibet and the Gelug school of Tibet, the life and historical significance of the first Dalai Lama, Gendun Drupa Pelzambo, 1391 to 1474, and it was later published in 2002 by Steiler Verlag. Between his completing his dissertation in 98 and then 2005, he came to my seminar today and regaled us with these stories. He passed through a series of amazing, prestigious appointments, including a research position at the Lumbini Institute, International Research Institute in Nepal, a teaching position at Macalester College, a research fellow in the Department of Sanskrit and Indian Studies at Harvard University, a deputy professor in the Department of Central Asian Studies at Humboldt University in Berlin, and finally an overseas research fellow, I think, for 3 years at the Graduate School of Letters at Kyoto University. After all that, his education having been rounded out in a pretty remarkable way, he was appointed a professor in the School of Chinese Classics at Renmin University in Beijing and served there from 2006 to 2015. And he was brought in to help found and direct this new research institute on Central Asia, and then took it upon himself to open a further center as part of that Center for Sino-Tibetan Buddhist Studies. This was an incredibly successful moment for Central Asian studies and Tibetan Buddhist studies in China. He hired all sorts of amazing scholars and created a really dynamic program there, training a number of young scholars who have gone on to positions all around the world today. During this time at Renmin, he's very much in demand, and also continued to serve at various other institutions. He was a visiting professor at Academia Sinica in Taiwan. He was a research fellow at Princeton's Institute of Advanced Study in 2012 and 13. He was a research fellow at Berlin's Institute of Advanced Studies in 2014 and 2015. So he's just moving around, meeting everyone. Everyone wants him. And finally, in 2015, he became professor of Chinese language and literature at Tsinghua University, where he is today. Professor Shen's areas of specialization include Tibetan history, particularly of the 11th to 15th centuries. He's written numerous highly influential papers on the history of Tibetan Tantric Buddhism during the Yuan Dynasty and among the Tanguts and Mongolians. He's authored and edited really too many to name volumes, but just to name a few. Philological Studies of Tibetan Buddhist History, I think was 2 volumes in 2010. Looking for Shangri-La in 2010. Texts and History, Formation of the Historical Narratives of Tibetan Buddhism and Construction of the Sino-Tibetan Buddhist Studies in 2016. And more recently in 2018, co-edited Tibetan Genealogies, Studies in Memoriam of Guge Tsering Gyalpo, who was a great scholar who spent a lot of time in Lhasa and Vienna. So beyond all these diverse activities, I must say he is very much responsible for keeping alive Tibetan Buddhist studies in China. And so for all that and his work doing that, we're really greatly in his debt and very pleased that he could come here and give us the lecture this evening. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Actually, I'm very honored to be here, and also a little nervous to deliver this prestigious lecture in the Khyentse Lecture series. And what I'm going to do is to share some of my new discoveries about the older story, the Nanjing Miracle, through my studies on those texts on the code and the practices of Avalokiteśvara in early Ming China. And I want to also share some new thought on the political and the religious history in the Ming Dynasty. And let me begin with the Nanjing Miracle. What is the Nanjing Miracle? In the 5th year of the Yongle Reign of the Ming Dynasty, that is the year 1407, Emperor Yongle invited the 5th Karmapa Lama to the capital and held a great feast of universal salvation, in Chinese, Pudu Dazhai, at the Linggu Monastery in Nanjing, to transfer merits and offer blessings for his deceased parents' salvation. And regard this great feast of the Nanjing, the universal salvation, it recorded in Chinese historical documents as follows. The Emperor of the Great Ming respectfully invited the great precious Dharma King, the Karmapa, to take command of all the monks under the heaven and to conduct a great feast of universal salvation at the Linggu Monastery in memorial of the late imperial father, Emperor Taizu, the founding father of the Ming Dynasty, and the late imperial mother, Empress Xiaozi, as well as for the salvation of all the spirits of the dead in the world. And it goes in detail. So in the 2nd month, the great master Karmapa was commanded to establish the Dharma altar at the Linggu Monastery and offer sacrifice to the late imperial father and the late imperial mother. The master led the monks from all over the world to conduct the great feast of universal salvation, which lasted for 14 days. And the sky was filled, during the process, the sky was filled with colored clouds, celestial flowers, sweet rain, sweet dew, lilacs and auspicious lights, along with blue birds and the white crane, circling day after night. In one night, cypress trees bloomed with golden flowers throughout the capital. And the golden immortals and Lohans, Arhats, floated in the clouds. White elephants and blue lions appeared in the majestic and wonderful forms, and guided by the celestial lamps, banners, and the canopies, revolved endlessly with various phenomena never ceasing. Buddhist chanting and heavenly music echoed in the sky, and the courtiers submitted congratulatory memoirs, and scholars present hymns in praise of the propitious omens to the emperor. Then in the 3rd month, the Karmapa was conferred a very long title with over 30 characters, but the most important is the great and the precious Dharma King, the title. And he is given the duty to be in command of Buddhism under the heaven. So he is the head of the Buddhist affair in whole China. Now, obviously, this great feast of universal salvation was unprecedented in its grandeur and filled with mystical wonders and miracles. Many literati and poets at the time left behind numerous writings, poems, or the other literary and poetic writings, extolling and embellishing the event, thus passing its fame down to future generations. And a remarkable artifact that remains from that time is a 50-meter long painting scroll titled Picture of Solving and Blessing the Ming Emperor Taizu, which meticulously documented the magnificence of the event with vivid illustrations and texts. It is a rare treasure in the history of Sino-Tibetan Buddhist art. The written record in the painting scroll documented the various auspicious signs and marvels that occurred each day during the 14 days of the festival, inscribed in 5 different scripts. So, just a second. In Chinese, Tibetan, Mongolian, Old Uyghur, and very recently we figured out the 5th one is the ancient Thai script used in Yunnan region in southwest China. So actually, without this visual illustration of the Nanjing Miracle, maybe we will not call it the Nanjing Miracle, but I think that is a treasure now still kept in Tibetan Museum. As a Tibetologist, we know it's existent for quite a long time. I think in 1949, Hugh Richardson, when he was the ambassador in Lhasa, he went to visit to the Tsupo Monastery and got the chance to take a look at these scrolls. And then he was given the Tibetan text, the Tibetan inscriptions. Later he translated the Tibetan text into English and published in his work, the Karmapas. And but since I think quite a long time, especially since the geographical publication, the print of this painting was published, I think, in the late 90s. Many people, many scholars, especially scholars of art history, are working on this hand scrolls. But people often only concentrated on this kind of visual expression and in the perspective of art history. But nobody had the ability to disciple all those this inscription in 5 scripts. And I think the Tibetan, Chinese, Mongolian was for sure, for certain. But the Old Uyghur took some time to people to identify that's the Old Uyghur. But the 5th one, we often thought that was either Arabic or Persian or the Chagtai Mongolian. But only, I think, the year before, last year, I think a British scholar finally identified that's the old Thai script. But I think the scholars most, if you look at it, you are amazed and admire it. It's really a treasure. That's why I think the name Nanjing Miracle was given. I think one of the scholars who gave the whole event of the pictures as a Nanjing Miracle was Professor Patricia Berger, who was a professor here for art historian. He published a wonderful article called Miracles in Nanjing, and is here?
Yeah.
Professor. Oh, hi. Thank you. Needless to say, this great feast of universal salvation was a momentous event in the political and the religious history of the early Ming Dynasty. It is quite puzzling, however, despite the widespread discussion and admiration of this great feast of universal salvation and its rare wonders and miracles, few have delved deeply into historical background. People often associate the name Great Feast of Universal Salvation with the common word and land ritual of Han Chinese Buddhism, or even the Taoism, the 水落法会, believe it to be a widespread practice in traditional Chinese Buddhism for transferring merits to deceased ancestors' spirit. The Great Feast of Universal Salvation is the largest and most solemn ceremony among all Chinese Buddhist rituals, renowned for its immense scale and exceptional merits. Legend had it that it first appeared during the reign of Liang Wu-di, that means in the late 5th and early 6th century. Then during the Hongwu period of the early Ming, a great feast of universal salvation was already held at the Linggu Monastery to transfer merits to the spirits of fallen soldiers in southern expeditions. Then also Linggu Monastery was designated by the Emperor Hongwu as the official site of the Great Feast of Universal Salvation. Therefore, it seems natural for Emperor Yongle to hold a great feast of universal salvation at the Linggu Monastery. There is no need for further search for explanation regarding this matter. Historians in the past, however, tended to view this great feast of universal salvation as political spectacular, a political show orchestrated by Emperor Yongle to legitimize his usurpation of the throne. They believed that the appearance of the Fifth Karmapa Lama and the various unprecedented miracles were merely embellishments to enhance the success of this political show. Furthermore, the political spectacle directed by Emperor Yongle also elevated the Fifth Karmapa, and who was awarded the title of the Great Precious Dharma King for his outstanding performance. This elevated the Karmakajupa sect in general, which had long been in disadvantaged position in the political and the religious society of medieval Tibet, to a proeminent political and religious power in Uzang region in central Tibet. Even today, as you all know, the Great Precious Dharma King remains one of the most influential figures in the political and religious realm and the religious realms of Tibet. And the political interpretation of this great feast of universal salvation gives the impression that the so-called Nanjing Miracle was nothing more than a sensational performance of real politics. And the Emperor Yongle and the Fifth Karmapa were the two most outstanding actors in this drama. However, it is clearly recorded in historical sources of the Ming Dynasty that the Fifth Karmapa Lama, Deshin Sheba, both actually in Chinese and Tibetan, they possessed a profound ability with miraculous powers that are hard to fathom, and his reputation spread throughout China before he came to China proper. And Emperor Yongle had heard of his extraordinary spiritual practices since his time in the north, in his principality. Thus, in the first month of the first year of the Yongle Reign, That means when as the Yongle Emperor became the emperor, he sent the court official Hou Xian and the monk Zhi Guang to Tsopo Gongbo, the root monastery of the Gakupa sect, to invite the Fifth Karmapa to the imperial capital and request him to conduct the ritual of giving blessing for the late Emperor Taizu and Empress Ma. This indicates that Emperor Yongle's invitation to the Fifth Karmapa to Linggu Monastery in Nanjing to conduct the great feast of universal salvation was a serious and earnest matter. The great feast of universal salvation should not be regarded as a mere political spectacle driven by political motivation. And furthermore, if it was just an ordinary great feast of universal salvation in Chinese tradition or in Chinese style, or a typical word and land ritual in the Han Chinese style, why would Emperor Yongle specifically invite a Tibetan Buddhist master from afar to preside over this feast in Linggu Monastery? A Han Chinese style great feast of universal salvation would not require the presence of a Tibetan Buddhist high monk. The Fifth Karmapa's arduous journey from central Tibet to Nanjing further emphasized the significance and the uniqueness of this event. To elaborate, if the great feast of universal salvation presided over by him, by the Karmapa, was just an ordinary Han-style award and land Dharma assembly, where did this miraculous Nanjing Miracle came from? Clearly, the historical nature of the Nanjing Miracle is very vague and requires further meticulous and in-depth research. With those questions in mind, I begin to re-examine the relevant Chinese and Tibetan literary materials about this great feast of universal salvation in search for a breakthrough to resolve those doubts. First of all, what inspired me to associate this great feast of universal salvation with its religious nature was an anecdotic account commonly found in the notes of Ming literature. It states, during the early Yongle period, there was an occasion when emissaries were sent to welcome a genuine monk from Tianzu, from India, to the capital. That's actually it's not from Tianzu, from India, but from Tibet. But it shows the ignorance of Chinese literature at that time. But actually, in Chinese literature, we made a clear division between Indian monks and Tibetan monks. If the Indian monks called the monks of the Western heavens, if the Tibetan monks is called the monks of Western Fan, the Western barbarians. Actually, the Fan is not necessarily barbarians, but the Western Tibet. But here, this literature is ignorance of that. So that is from Tianzu to the capital. He was named the great precious Dharma king and resided in Linggu Monastery. And he was quite renewed for his spiritual powers and miracles. He taught people to recite the mantra Om Mani Padme Hum, and the believers began reciting it day and night. At the time, Li Jiding, a state academician in the Hanling Academy, laughed and said, if he truly possesses supernatural powers, he should be able to speak in Chinese directly. Why does he wait for an interpreter to translate it and then know what it means? And moreover, the meaning of the mantra Om Mani Padme Hum is nothing more than I'm following you, 让俺来把你哄 in Chinese. But people do not understand it. These who understood agreed with his opinion. And this anecdote took place during the process when officials and the military personnel from the entire court lined up to participate in the Great Feast of Universal Salvation. It is found in the notes of many Ming literature. Apart from indicating that some Han Chinese literature had reservations about Tibetan Buddhism and doubted the supernatural powers of the Dharma kings and the Tibetan high monks, it also reveals an interesting fact. So that means during the Great Feast of Universal Salvation, the Great Master taught the believers to recite the 6-syllable mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum, day and night. This indicates that the Great Feast of Universal Salvation was not a typical Han-style word and land Dharma assembly, the 水落法会, but rather related to the practice of Bodhisattva Avalokiteśvara in Tibetan Buddhism. The 6-syllable mantra is a secret mantra, as you all know, used to invoke Bodhisattva Avalokiteśvara, would not typically appear in the ritual practices of Chinese Buddhism, but it is commonly found in various practices related to Bodhisattva Avalokiteśvara in Tibetan Buddhism. Furthermore, in another account, in the imperial record of observing the pagoda shadow at the Linggu Monastery, that was the Nanjing Miracle, occurs. The emperor with his disciples and as ministers every morning want to look at the shade of pagoda and to see what kind of new miracles occurs. So we come across an account of Emperor Yongle visiting Linggu Monastery, accompanied by disciples of the great precious Dharma King, to observe the pagoda shade. It states the following. On the 19th day in the morning, the great state preceptor of empowerment, Hongji, came to report on the pagoda shadow. On the first level, they saw 3 statues of the great precious Dharma King, the Buddha of the Western Heaven, and the great benefactor Buddha, and 6 statues of arhats standing on the left and the right. On the second level, they saw a red-colored statue of a Bodhisattva Avalokiteśvara and 4 statues of Bodhisattvas on each side, standing respects and offering incense and flowers. A radiant light of 5 colors covered the treasure canopy on the top of the pagoda, casting a shining and magnificent shade. In this case, the red-colored Avalokiteśvara, observed by Emperor Yongle, refers to Jina Sagala Avalokiteśvara, as also well known in Chinese called the Shen Hai Guanyin. In Tibetan is the Gewa Jatso, in Chinese called the Victorious Ocean. And Jina Sagala is a manifestation of Bodhisattva Avalokiteśvara that is particularly revered and practiced within the Gamagajupa tradition. Is not commonly seen in Tibetan Buddhism. Based on the 2 accounts mentioned above, we can speculate that the Great Feast of Universal Salvation, hosted by the great precious Dharma King, the Karmapa, was likely related to the practice of Jina Sagala Avalokiteśvara in Tibetan Buddhist tradition. Now, I started a search for more information related to the great feast of universal salvation in the Tibetan biographies of the Fifth Karmapa Lama. And his biography explicitly states that the Ming Emperor indeed invited him to the capital to pay homage to his parents and guide them to a favorable rebirth. This aligns perfectly with the accounts found in Chinese historical sources. Following the emperor's request, the Fifth Karmapa constructed a grand mandala within Linggu Monastery, following the ritual of the secret mandala tradition of Tibetan Buddhism. That means he constructed a huge mandala and did a great festival surrounding this mandala according to the Tibetan Tantric Buddhist tradition. And he engaged in the practice of circulating the mandala and making offerings. During the mandala ceremony, various miraculous occurrences appeared due to the pure faith of the believers, which had never been seen before in China proper. They continuously manifested, astonishing the witnesses. This clearly tells us that the great feast of universal salvation was not, again, a Han-style word and land Dharma assembly, but rather the great mandala ritual of Tibetan Tantric Buddhism. This also corresponds to what is described in Chinese text as the establishment of a Dharma altar. The Fatai is a mandala. The ceremony began on the 5th day of the 2nd lunar month in the 5th year of the Yongle Reign. The great master Karmapa and his disciple established altogether 12 mandalas. And the Karmapa himself constructed the Jina Sagala mandala, and his disciples built additional 12 mandalas of the deities like Vajjalakila, Guhaya Samaja, and Vadoya Dhatu, and the Dhamma Dhatu, or Hivajra, and the Thala, the Jezuma. The great ritual ceremony of the mandalas continued until the 18th day of the 2nd lunar month, and spanning a total of 14 days. During this period, they invoked the spirits of the deceased emperor and the empress, requesting their presence, and the Karmapa master performed in empowerment and dispelled obstacles for them while conducting liberation rituals for other deceased beings. On the evening of the 19th day, the master cremated the spirit tabrets, the paiwei of the emperor and the empress, while others pouring the colored sand used in the construction of the mandalas into the Great Lake. That means the Shen Lake in Nanjing. The ceremony concluded at this point. So actually, this great feast of universal salvation was actually conducted in the way of constructing 12 sand mandalas, and surrounding those mandalas did offerings, sacrificing, and so on. That was the great festival. Should look like in the time. And from these somewhat vague and imprecise records, we can greatly, generally understand that the great feast of universal salvation held at the Linggu Monastery in Nanjing was a Tibetan Tantric Buddhist ritual ceremony known as the Great Mandala Ritual. Its internal form involved the construction of 12 mandalas representing various tantric deities using colored sun over a period of 14 days. Rituals and offerings were then performed surrounding these mandalas, invoking the presence of the spirits of deceased emperor and empress and all other deceased beings. The Karmapa master performed empowerment and conducted rituals to help them attain liberation from the cycle of the rebirth and guide them to be reborn in auspicious realms. Although 12 mandalas are listed, but the main mandala was the one built by the Karmapa master himself, dedicated to Bodhisattva Jina Sagala Avalokiteśvara. The entire great feast of universal salvation was primarily focused on the practice of Bodhisattva Jina Sagala Avalokiteśvara for the purpose of liberating the deceased beings. And the biography of the Fifth Karmapa contains several mentions of the spiritual connection between the Yongle Emperor and the Bodhisattva Avalokiteśvara and the Karmapa, the Master Karmapa himself. In the bibliography of the Karmapa found in the Kebe Garden, one of the most famous Tibetan historiography, it is recorded that after the passing of the Hongwu Emperor, the Yongle Emperor, in order to fulfill the wishes of his deceased parents, enshrined an image of Bodhisattva Manjushri. And while the Empress Dowager was regarded as an emanation of a goddess of liberation, the Tala. That is also the first, one of a few cases before the Qing time. The Chinese emperor was taken as an incarnation of Bodhisattva Manjushri. I think in the Yuan time, we also see only one mention that the Kublai Khan was considered by Papa Lama also as the incarnation of Manjushri. So it later became a tradition, like all the Qing, the Qianlong Emperor is a Bodhisattva Emperor. He was the incarnation of Manjushri, but he is a very earliest mention. And however, due to being preoccupied with the state affairs, the Yongle Emperor did not devote himself sufficiently to the practice of the Dharma at this time. He had a dream while he initially went to Mountain Pudu to pay respect to Bodhisattva Avalokiteśvara. He climbed the mountain, became tired, and thought of returning. Suddenly, he saw a large blue lotus with blossoming petals, which invigorated his spirit and dispelled his fatigue. And encouraged, he climbed to the peak of the mountain and finally beheld the main statue of Bodhisattva Avalokiteśvara, receiving his blessing. In addition, in the extensive biography of the Fifth Karmapa, there is a record of him bestowing the empowerments of Bodhisattva Jina Sagala Avalokiteśvara upon the emperor and the empress. According to the legend, during the ceremony where the Karmapa master bestowing the empowerments of Bodhisattva Jina Sagala and the great victorious mother, the Tala, upon the emperor and the empress, he personally witnessed the main statue of Bodhisattva Jina Sagala and the great victorious mother. During his residence at the Linggu Monastery, he also personally witnessed the mandala of Bodhisattva Jina Sagala and created a ritual for the practice of Bodhisattva Jina Sagala. At this point, we can probably believe that the Nanjing Miracle was brought about the practice of Bodhisattva Jina Sagala. From this, we can also understand why the Yongle Emperor specifically invited the Fifth Karmapa Lama to preside over the great feast of universal salvation. It is not only because the Karmapa has a tradition of practicing Bodhisattva Jina Sagala, but also because the Karmapa himself is believed to be an incarnation of a Bodhisattva Avalokiteśvara in the human realms. As is well known, the Karmapa sect was the earliest sect in Tibetan Buddhism to adopt the system of reincarnate lamas, starting with the third Karmapa, Rangchung Dorje. Some believe starting from the second, but I firmly believe the third one is the first. And he has been recognized as the incarnation of a Bodhisattva Avalokiteśvara. And this has continued through successive generations. The second Karmapa, the Karmapakshi, served as a spiritual advisor to the Mongol Khan, the monk Khan. And the third and the fourth Karmapa also visited the Yuan dynasty during the reign of the last Yuan Emperor, Tukan Temur, and to transmit Buddhist teachings. And they were already very well known among Tibetan Buddhist followers of the Yuan dynasty. According to the Shen Ximing's, the gazetteer of the mountain Pudu, an authoritative work from the Yuan dynasty, it states as follows, I quote, at the beginning of the current emperor's reign, that means the last Yuan emperor, the Shen Di, in the first part of the 14th century, the venerable teacher, the great precious king, Karmapa, came from the western region to the capital. Being profound in knowledge and behaviors, he was full of wisdom and blessing, had a clear understanding of the three worlds, and propagated the teaching of the one vehicle. And he manifested the compassionate power of the Tathagatas and proclaimed the mantra of the 6 syllables. From the courtiers to the common people, all received his teachings and were spiritually inspired. The extent of these experiences is too numerous to be fully recorded. Could it be anything other than the manifestation of a great being, Avalokiteśvara? That means already in the Yuan time, people in China already recognized the Karmapa Lamas were a manifestation of the reincarnation of the Avalokiteśvara, in Chinese called the Guanyin Dashi, like the Dani Chimbo in Tibetan. So this however, such events were not yet known in Jiangnan area, like in the south of Jiangnan, south of the Yangtze River. In this area, people are unknown, but in Nanjing belong to this area. Regarding the recitation of the 6 syllables, the mantra that the master often recited was Om Mani Padme Hum, and its merit are fully expounded in the Mahayana Sutra of the ornamentation of the precious kings, the Baowangjing, Zhuangyan Baowangjing. So this indicates that the people of the Yuan dynasty were already familiar with the identity of the venerable master, the great precious Dharma king, Karmapa, as an incarnation of a Bodhisattva Avalokiteśvara. The activities of the third Karmapa, Rangchung Dorje, and the fourth Karmapa, Rebbe Dorje, both within and outside the Mongol court towards the end of the Yuan dynasty, were widely known. Therefore, multiple records, documents in Chinese historical books of the Ming Dynasty state that when the Yongle Emperor resided in his principality in the north, he had heard of the remarkable spiritual attainments of the Venerable Karmapa master, and that's why I sent people to summon him. It is not an unfounded claim made by historians. The Tibetan biographies of the Fifth Karmapa also clearly state that when the Yongle Emperor resided in the north, he had already heard of the master's famous name and greatly desired to meet him. After ascending the throne and stabilizing the country, the emperor eagerly sought to invite the master to transfer merits and gave him blessing to his deceased parents, for whom he felt a debt of gratitude. Therefore, he urgently requested the Karmapa master to come to the capital. Before the master arrived in the capital, one day the emperor saw in a meditative state the transcendental vision of the Buddha sitting on the magnificent lion throne surrounded by Supreme Buddha Mother and the various Bodhisattvas. The master from the Western region, that means the Karmapa, wearing a black hat, was also present. When the two finally met, the emperor found that the master's appearance, demeanor, and aura perfectly matched what he had seen in the transcendental pure vision in Jignan. And in the past, scholars have often been inclined to interpret the exchange between the emperors of the Yuan and the Ming Dynasty and the high-ranking Tibetan Buddhist monks in a political context, while largely overlooking the religious facts and the significance within this relationship. In fact, the religious connection between figures like the Karmapa masters and the rulers of Yuan and the Ming Dynasty may have held great importance than purely political implications. The second, the third, and the first Karmapa master had a close religious association with the Mongol Yuan rulers, but they did not seem to gain elevated political status or secular benefits as a result. The Karmapa lineage was never a strong political force in Tibetan local politics. The reason why the Yongle Emperor invited the fifth Karmapa to the court and entrusted him to preside over the special great feast of universal salvation was likely due to his identity of the incarnation of Bodhisattva Avalokiteśvara, rather than the political influence of the Karma Gajipa sect in the central Tibet. The title of great precious Dharma king bestowed by the Yongle Emperor undoubtedly enhanced the religious prestige and the political influence of the fifth Karmapa master. However, it did not instantly transform the Karmapas into the most politically powerful sect in central Tibet. The premature passing of the fifth Karmapa master and the recognition of his reincarnated child received direct attention from the Yongle Emperor. He dispatched Bandan Zashi and the Dharma king of great wisdom, and he himself is Andor from the Andor regions, was a disciple of the fifth Karmapa, and to visit Tsupo monastery and to verify the authenticity of the sixth incarnation of the living Buddha of the Karmapa lineage. This set a precedent for the central government's intervention in the reincarnation system of Tibetan Buddhism. In the biography of the Bandan Zashi, titled Record of the Origins of the Son of the Buddha from the Western Heaven, we found the following accounts. And this biography was also discovered around 10 years ago, and in Chinese translation. And the Tibetan version is, the whole version is not available, only quoted by other Tibetan historic orographical works like Ando Chejong, Dome Chejong, exists in Chinese. And it says at the age of 47, when the Banden Zashi was 47 years old, the Emperor Yongle still commanded the son of Buddha, that means the Banden Zashi, to travel to the Ezang region, solely study the profound teaching, and examine whether the great precious Dharma king, the Karmapa, had reincarnated. Upon reaching the region Gombo, the son of Buddha met with the great precious Dharma king, the Karmapa master, who was just over 10 years old at the time. The son of Buddha observed that when the master was only a few months old, one monk came to visit, and upon seeing the monk, the child smiled. When the child reached 1 year old, the state preceptor, Gonlongpa, and he was a direct disciple of the Fifth Karmapa, as I said, a disciple of 3 lives, personally went to see him, and upon meeting, the child throwed himself into his arms and talked about matters from their past lives. When the son of Buddha, the Banden Zashi, was receiving the peace instruction of Guru Yoga from the Karmapa master, he silently pondered, is this the true incarnation of Karmapa master, or he is an impostor? Just as son of Buddha was hesitating, the Karmapa master immediately stopped giving the instruction. Instead, took half a sheet of paper on which he wrote the 3 characters, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha in Chinese, Fu, Fa, Shen, and toasted it to the son of Buddha. Remembering that the Fifth Karmapa, the Karmapa master's previous incarnation had written those characters before, the son of Buddha realized that it was indeed authentic. On another occasion, the Karmapa master asked the son of Buddha, is the venerable master Zhiguang at peace and content? The Zhiguang, I was already mentioned, he was only a Han Chinese monk who got the title of a state precept because he was a follower of Sakyapa, traditions of Tibetan Tantric Buddhism. And he also showed Banden Zashi a portrait which further convinced him that the Karmapa master was indeed the true reincarnation. In the past, scholars were accustomed to interpret Ming Emperor Yongle's invitation of numerous Tibetan Buddhist masters to court and bestowing upon them prominent titles like Dharma kings and religious kings as a political strategy of dividing and ruling, completely disregarding the role of Emperor Yongle's personal religious belief. However, when we consider the interactions between the Karmapa and the Emperor of the Yuan and the Ming Dynasty, we should not overlook the religious connection between them, which is a highly significant fact. As the Karmapa master was recognized as the earliest incarnated living Buddha, the embodying Bodhisattva Avalokiteśvara in history of Tibetan Buddhism, they might have been favored by the Yuan and the Ming emperors who had a strong faith in Buddhism, especially in Tibetan Buddhism. The worship of Bodhisattva Avalokiteśvara is a widely practiced belief in both the Han Chinese and the Tibetan Mahayana Buddhist traditions. We have sufficient evidence to suggest that the propagation of Bodhisattva Avalokiteśvara worship and practices in Tibetan Tantric Buddhism has already spread extensively and deeply among the Han Chinese in China proper during the early years of the Ming Dynasty through the influence of the Western Xia, the Tangut, and the Mongol Yuan dynasties. Therefore, it is not entirely incomprehensible that the Emperor Yongle invited the Fifth Karmapa, recognized as the embodiment of Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, to the capital and entrusted him to host the grand mandala ritual of the Bodhisattva Jina Sagala, to offer blessings to Emperor Hongwu and Empress Ma, and to save all departed spirits from suffering and guide them to the blissful Western Pure Land. So many years ago, actually I discovered two compilations of Chinese translations of Tibetan sadhana text on the yogic practice of Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara in the National Library of China in Beijing. Those compilations were made in the early years of the Ming Dynasty and are titled Yogic Practice of Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara and the esoteric text of Avalokiteshvara. The former is the fifth volume of a Ming Dynasty compilation called A Method of Practice, or the Dharma Gate of Practice. And this collection already, the fifth volume, already included 18 sadhana texts of Avalokiteshvara practices. But I don't know the other volumes, maybe from the first to fourth volumes. So all the so-called the mangas, the instructions of the yogic practice of Avalokiteshvara are not, maybe not, maybe otherwise too many. Is already quite many, I think. And which the first is the volume which includes 18 different sadhanas of Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara practice. The later esoteric text of Avalokiteshvara contains an additional 9 sadhanas of Avalokiteshvara. Although those collections were compiled in the early years of the Ming Dynasty, but the 27 sadhanas of Avalokiteshvara practice included in them were translated during different periods, the Western Xia and the Yuan and the Ming dynasties. They provide a comprehensive view of the spread of the yogic practices of Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara in Tibetan Tantric Buddhism in the Han Chinese region during these 3 different eras. I think until very late, maybe in the 19th century, we have the compilation of this Mengna text, the sadhanas, like in Dangatsu. We don't have this collection of sadhana texts concentrated on one deity like Avalokiteshvara, even in Tibetan tradition. But in China, in the early Ming time, we already have these 2 collections of the sadhana text of Avalokiteshvara. And those yogic practices encompass a wide range of ritual, including the deity yoga of Avalokiteshvara, that's most common, the Lai Neju, and the ritual of the direct realization of Jina Sagala Avalokiteshvara, the Ngupatupa, and the self-initiation ritual of entering the mandalas, and various other yogic practices for different purposes. The practices involve different manifestations of Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, such as the white Avalokiteshvara with 1 face and 2 arms, and the white Avalokiteshvara with 1 face and 4 arms, the red Avalokiteshvara with 1 face and 4 arms, known as the Great Compassionate Jina Sagala Avalokiteshvara, and the secret, the double-bodied, the Yabuyung Avalokiteshvara, and the Avalokiteshvara with the will of wish-fulfilling jewel, and the great snake Avalokiteshvara, the lion's roar Avalokiteshvara, and many more. the transmission of these yogic practices of Avalokiteśvara encompasses various lineage of different schools, including the Gamakaküpa, the Chopo Kaküpa, and the Sakyapa, among others. This clearly demonstrates that the Avalokiteśvara practice of Tibetan Tantric Buddhism had already been widely propagated and practiced in China proper during the early years of the Ming Dynasty. It is worth noting that among these 27 sadhanas of Avalokiteśvara practices, at least 3 of them have explicit inscriptions indicating that they were transmitted by Karmapa masters. They are as follows. The first is the peace instruction of the meditative practice of the great compassionate victorious ocean. That's the Jina Sagala Avalokiteśvara. It inscribes that it was compiled by the great precious Karmapa master Rangchung Dorje and translated into English by somebody, his identity is unknown. And the second meditation on Avalokiteśvara, transmitted by Karmapa master, also translated into Chinese by somebody, his identity is unknown. And the third, the peace instruction of the yogic practices of the great compassionate Avalokiteśvara, again, is the Jina Sagala Avalokiteśvara, transmitted by the great, precious, white-headed Karmapa master, and received the oral instruction of the grateful teacher by the master Lebo in Huguo Renwang Si. That's a Tibetan Buddhist temple in Beijing in the Yuan time. So, as for the majority of the sadhana text without explicit inscriptions, it is unknown whether they were also transmitted by the Karmapa master. However, the peace instruction of the meditative practice of the great compassionate victorious ocean is confirmed to have been transmitted by the third Karmapa Rangchung Dorje. In his collected works, there are multiple texts related to Jina Sagala Avalokiteśvara, such as rituals for direct realizing the Jina Sagala and the empowerment and the assembly offering rituals for Jina Sagala and the empowerment ritual for Jina Sagala, as well as a text entitled The Secret Practices of Jina Sagala Avalokiteśvara, which is only existed in the catalog now. Although the peace instruction of the meditative practice of the great compassionate victorious ocean does not perfectly match any of those Tibetan texts, but its contents can be found in each of them separately. So an Old Uyghur translation is also found in the Buddhist scripture, written in Old Uyghur from the Yuan Dynasty, discovered in Tufan in 1908, so now preserved in Berlin now. As mentioned earlier, among the 27 sadhanas of Avalokiteśvara practices compiled during the Ming Dynasty, we see various forms of Avalokiteśvara practice. The most fundamental among them belong to the category of deity yoga, deity meditation in the development stage, the gshegs. In this practice, the practitioner visualizes the deity, aligns their body, speech, and mind with the Bodhisattva Avalokiteśvara, and merge the body of vows and the body of wisdom, becoming inseparable as one, ultimately attaining the state of enlightenment. Furthermore, there are also yogic practices that fall under the category of a completion stage, the zori, which involves the cultivation of subtle energy channels and the tikle to achieve accomplishment. For example, there is a text translated from in the time of Western Xia, in the Tangguta period, called the secret mantra meditation on the 6 syllables of Avalokiteśvara, and also known as the meditation of abandoning life. And this practice is intended for practitioner to engage in various yogic practices at the moment of the death. It involves yogic meditation on Avalokiteśvara while employing techniques such as the practice of inner heat, the tummo, and the transference of consciousness, the pova, to enable the pure awareness to arise from the practitioner's so-called Brahma aperture, leading to the rebirth in a pure land. There is also a practice for recognizing the luminous, recognizing the luminosity at the moment of the death and attaining the accomplishment of the Dhammakaya Buddha, so-called the Chikas Öse or Dakamas Öse. Within those 27 practices, we also encounter many ritual practices categorized as awakening activities, the Chile or Chilic nature, the karma yoga, or activities of skillful means, which include various methods for healing, despairing negativity, prolonging life, and averting calamities, benefiting oneself and others. For instance, there is a ritual for practicing the great compassionate Avalokiteśvara with self-empowerment and precepts transmitted by Mitra Yogi and Chupo Lochawa Jambepa in the 12th century. It is a ritual practice performed with the context of meditating the mandala of the Yabuyong statue of Avalokiteśvara, involving the accomplishment of 8 types of worldly activities, where all aspirations and wishes of the practitioner are spontaneously fulfilled. Like the great feast of universal salvation or the transference of merit and offering ceremonies, a ritual aimed at liberating the deceased beings and bestowing blessings to them clearly fall into the category of awakening activities of skillful means, or Karma Sutra, Karma Yoga in Tibetan Tantric Buddhism. Unfortunately, among the aforementioned 27 sadhanas of Avalokiteśvara practice, we do not find any text directly related to the ritual of transference and offering. However, in the collected works of the Third Karmapa, Rangchung Dorje, we come across a text called the Ritual for Purifying and Pacifying Obstacles Through the Dharma Gate of Avalokiteśvara. It is a ritual practice specifically designed for the transference and offering to the deceased beings associated with the Jina Sagala Avalokiteśvara practices within the Gamma-Kachupa tradition. It is plausible to imagine that the great feast of universal salvation held by the Fifth Karmapa master at the Linggu Monastery in Nanjing was based on this ritual text. With this in mind, we can present a rough outline of the text as follows. By doing so, we can gain a glimpse into the specific procedure of the great feast of universal salvation conducted at the Linggu Monastery in the 5th year of the Yongle Reign. So here I gave you the outlines of this practice. So it divide into 3 parts of the practice. The first is the preliminary preparations. So it's make the 7 for the offerings, offer flowers, water, and the lamp, oils, this, to the Avalokiteśvara. Then the practitioner, actually, in this case, is the Karmapa, maybe generating the visualization of the deity within himself. That's how I say created the body of vows. It became the Avalokiteśvara, and the setting up the water fast for the later the empowerment. And then the main practice for benefiting the deceased is the first, again, the preliminary practices. And then the main practices for benefiting the deceased, and summoning the spirit of the deceased, and dispelling malevolent influence, purifying the misdeed of the deceased, and bathing, purifying defilements with the 6 perfections, and purifying the 3 poisons, eliminating the 3 poisons by relying on the 3 jewels and reciting auspicious verses, and engaging in the Avalokiteśvara mandala practices, receiving the empowerment and purifying misdeeds, engaging in the so-called the 7-fold practices of the enlightenment. So like first, the order is wrong, the taking refuges, and make confessions, rejoicing, attending the will of the Dharma, and praying for the longevity of the Guru, and dedicating the merit to all the sentient beings. And then generating the bodhicitta mind, receiving the empowerment of the 5 wisdoms, praying to receive the empowerment of the main deity, and receiving the empowerment of the 5 Buddhas. In the end, the concluding practice, burning the name tags of the deceased, as the Karmapa did, cremated the paiwei, the spirit tablets of the deceased, and manifesting the path to the Pure Land, and the dedication of the merit, as usual. I think that's, we can imagine the Nanjing Miracle is just designed as this instruction, described. And the re-examination and the reinterpretation of the Nanjing Miracle mentioned above may illustrate that the great feast of universal salvation held at the Linggu Monastery in Nanjing during the 5th year of the Yongle Reign was not merely a political display. Although it is evident that the Emperor Yongle's decision to host such ceremony aimed at delivering blessings to his deceased parents and the deceased spirits across the nation had a clear political motivation. His choice to invite the 5th Karmapa master and organize a Tibetan tantric mandala ritual focused on Jina Sagala Avalokiteśvara's removal of obstacles at the Linggu Monastery in Nanjing reveals Emperor Yongle's deep-rooted Tibetan Buddhist beliefs. Of course, I have other evidence to argue. Actually, Yongle maybe even a better Tibetan Buddhist than the Qianlong Emperor in the Ming Dynasty. So, and therefore, the great feast of universal salvation itself represented a profoundly significant religious event. Its successful execution not only indicated a substantial foundation for Tibetan Buddhism in early Ming, but also paved the way for its widespread dissemination in Ming China. And previously, scholars often attributed the demise of the Yuan dynasty, which lasted less than 100 years, to the excessive reliance of Mongol rulers on Tibetan Tantric Buddhism. They believed that the subsequent Ming Dynasty ruler would surely learned from this lesson and thus refused to accept Tibetan Buddhism, prohibiting its spread within and outside the Ming court. However, such assertions are clearly inconsistent with the history of the early Ming Dynasty. In fact, the Emperor Yongle's faith in Tibetan Buddhism far surpassed that of the Mongol rulers, and the scale and the depth of Tibetan Buddhism's spread in Ming China exceeded that of the preceding dynasties. Thank you very much.